I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. Thanks for joining. Feel free to drop a comment in the online window of Facebook Live if you'd like to let us know you're here. Let us say hi to you. Thanks everybody for watching. I started this webcast 9 years ago as a schizophrenia survivor and somebody who's had my own suicidal thoughts at occasional times in the past. I've wanted the public, and in particular people who face brain health challenges, to know of the incredible hope inherent in the great science being done by so many amazing scientists funded by One Mind that are developing better treatments for people who are struggling and suffering with their brain health. Also, I wanted to help people hear the stories of survivors of brain health issues so that they too can be inspired for their own recovery. This webcast, the title of this webcast is Embracing Life in the Age of COVID-19. And we had hoped to have singer-songwriter Erin Dunn on today. Unfortunately, technical challenges were preventing us from having her on. But we do have two amazing guests. We'll introduce in just a moment. You can see them here. But by way of introduction, we're living in unprecedented times. We're living in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic and what may be the worst week so far in the pandemic in terms of lives lost. Our leaders are letting us know that it's going to be a very challenging week and perhaps even 2 weeks ahead at the peak of the epidemic, the pandemic. And a recent study released by Kaiser Health News has shown that over 60% of Americans believe that the coronavirus pandemic has harmed their mental health. Joblessness, social distancing, isolation, and fear are all contributing to the spike in anxiety and depression that so many people are experiencing. And many leaders are concerned that all these factors, with the rise in these things, could contribute to one of the major leading causes of death in the United States, which is increasing, which is actually suicide. So joining us now to discuss how to prevent depression and suicidal thoughts in the era of COVID-19 are two amazing people. Erin Dunn, ScD, is a One Mind 2018 Rising Star Award-winning researcher who is a psychiatric epidemiologist and social epidemiologist and assistant professor of psychiatry at the Harvard Medical School. Erin, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Brandon.
Absolutely. Good to see you again. Also with us is the award-winning filmmaker and author of the book Cracked, Not Broken, Surviving and Thriving After a Suicide Attempt, an amazing mental health advocate, inspiration to so many people, including me, Kevin Hines. Kevin, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Brandon. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you. We have a couple of comments from Linda Meyer. Linda, thank you for watching. Absolutely. I'm happy to be broadcasting with you with these great guests today. And Rabina Riccitello is also here. Rabina, thank you so much for watching today and participating. She's a board member of One Mind. So Rabina, good to see you. Thank you. Also, Joshua Lepez. Josh, thanks for watching. Thanks so much. So Erin, you are a social and psychiatric epidemiologist, and you are focusing on adversity and how your research, how is your research revealing how exposure to stress can affect so many people during this COVID crisis and how they can cope still during these troubled times?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Brandon. So as you mentioned, a lot of my work focuses on the role of exposure to childhood adversity and stress. So a lot of what I study is the role of things like growing up under conditions of poverty, being exposed to child abuse and neglect, but also including things like natural disasters and traumas that we are certainly facing in the world today as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think there's two key things that have really emerged from the work that I've done and the work that other people have done that I want to share with folks. And that is, well, there's more than two things, but I'll kind of emphasize those two. But the first part is that we know from research studies that exposure to stress and adversity is associated with a greater risk of having something like depression and anxiety. So we know that people who've experienced these kinds of adversities, not just in childhood, but also at other stages in life, can experience not just elevated depressive and anxiety symptoms shortly after being exposed to these traumas, but might also end up having symptoms that rise to the level to meet diagnostic criteria. So meaning the kinds of symptoms that are more related to things that show up in how we are able to carry out our day-to-day lives. And I want to make sure that I emphasize that point, because most of what we're all experiencing now is really normal. The kinds of experiences we're having in terms of feeling anxious and feeling depressed and feeling hopeless are completely normal in the context of what we're going through right now. So I just want folks to be aware of that and to be thinking about how to differentiate when those responses are more typical and what we would expect, and when they maybe cross that line or that boundary where we have to start worrying about them a little bit more. And that's, I think, where we think more about how it affects people's ability to function on more of a day-to-day basis. So your ability to get out of bed, your ability to get out and engage in your work and things of that sort. And so the thing that we know is that adversity and stress and trauma is associated with a greater risk of having depression. But the other thing that's really so critical is that we also know that a lot of people, even when they experience very terrible things like traumatic life events, do okay. And the estimate is that it's about 2/3 of people will do okay. So I think that that's a really important point to emphasize, is that most people will end up not experiencing depression or anxiety or post-traumatic stress disorder or other kinds of really profound brain health related challenges as a result of this, because most people not only do okay, but some people will also go on to even experience resilience, where people will learn, for example, to identify areas of new growth around feelings of optimism and feelings of, taking on life's challenges with a sort of zestness that might not have existed prior to the pandemic. And as researchers, we often talk about this as around a concept of post-traumatic growth. So the growth that people experience, even as a result of experiencing, terrible stressors and traumas. So I think that's another key piece to really emphasize. I think the other piece is also that the extent to which people will experience this entire event as either risky or will experience some growth from it is going to depend on a whole range of factors. And I think here's where it's important to emphasize not just that the more biological pieces, which I think we often think most naturally about. So for example, how our genetic makeup makes us more or less likely to develop mental health and brain health related challenges like depression. But to also think about the genetic variation as not just shaping whether we are at increased risk, but we're also learning that our genes actually play a role in shaping how we respond favorably. And so there's work that is coming out of Mass General, for example, and other places where we're trying to understand genetic predictors of resilience. So I want to sort of keep that in mind in this idea that as we think about this constellation of how people can be doing, it's really a complex recipe, so to speak. It's not just genes. And genes are not only necessarily shaping risk, but they're also shaping protection. And I think the last thing I also want to say is that we also know from work on the topic of resilience that even in the face of adversity, we know there are things that people can do today and in the days and weeks ahead that can serve as really critical buffers to help protect people's brain health. And I think here's where we can be turning to things like exercise, social support, and other kinds of things like this to be able to really try to protect our brains as we ride out this crisis. So just to sort of close by saying, I hope that I'm conveying not only a message of risk, and I think we have to be really thoughtful to say that there certainly will be risk that people will experience as a result of this, but also to convey a message of hope, and that for most people, we'll all do okay, and that that I think there can even be opportunities for people to not only just survive this, but to also think and develop opportunities for more positive growth as a result of everything we're going through right now.
Mm-hmm. Erin, thank you so much for all those great points. And I think Kevin may resonate with Kevin. I've heard him speak about how he's developed a lot of strength after learning from his experience, and I have as well. So thanks for calling those out. We have a couple of points from the audience. Linda Meyer says exercise helps tremendously. I think echoing what you said, and I know, Kevin, you agree with that too. You said that before. So Erin, another question for you now. How do you assess future risk? Do we know who are the most vulnerable people to develop depression and potentially even suicidal thoughts after a major adverse life event? And you've identified teeth as an important biomarker. How does that work?
Yeah, that's great. So, so as I was saying before, definitely genetic variation does play a role. And what we're learning is that that there are lots of genetic variants that shape not only who's most at risk, but also that work in the context of adversity to shape how people do in the context of managing symptoms as a result of a range of exposures to different kinds of traumas. I've grown to be really interested in teeth, which are really unusual and amazing little resources that we sort of think about as being almost like fossils that live in our mouths. So essentially the story with teeth is that our teeth start forming beginning in utero, and they form similar to the way that trees do, in that they leave behind rings that record daily and weekly development. And just like trees, what's really remarkable about human teeth is that the characteristics of those growth lines can vary as a function of the kinds of experiences we're having in our day-to-day lives or weekly lives. And so part of what my research group has tried to do is to understand how exposures to a range of different types of traumatic life events and other kinds of experiences related to childhood adversity and stress might actually get recorded in the form of these lines, and how they can change the characteristics both with respect to how thin or thick these incremental growth lines are, but how there might also be what scientists refer to as stress lines that are overlaid on those incremental growth marks, and to see if we might be able at one point in the future to use teeth as potential tools to help us identify people who've been exposed to early life adversity. So we recently launched a study where we were trying to identify people who'd been exposed to stress and trauma in utero, specifically the Boston Marathon bombing. And we've now been starting to collect the teeth from mothers who were pregnant at that time. And so I can imagine that, in several years' time that we might be starting to try to collect children's baby teeth so that we can also understand how that might have been recorded in their children's teeth as they're forming. And for anyone who's interested in learning more about this work on teeth and how teeth might be a potential biomarker, we have a website that I can share, which is teethforscience.com. And that can be a helpful tool for anyone who wants to just learn more about this research in general, or if anyone is interested in possibly contributing to it in some form. So I'd encourage viewers to check it out if you're curious.
Thanks, Erin. That's fascinating. So, Kevin, I have a few questions for you now. Thanks for being with us again today. Kevin, you are a suicide attempt survivor, and you've written and spoken extensively about your attempt to take your own life in 2000. And thank you for sharing your story on so many levels. What inspired you to become a mental health activist and advocate for suicide prevention?
I had no no want to share my story, no inclination, no thought process about it until I was met with by two different clergymen who suggested I do so. In the year 2000, I attempted to take my life by jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge, for those of you watching who don't know, which is a method of suicide that is 99% fatal. 1% survived that fall in the last 83 years of that bridge being open. And after my survival and the fact that I broke my back on the way down, shattered my T12, L1, L2 lower vertebrae into shards like glass, missevered my spinal cord by 2 millimeters, in the water, went 70 feet deep and resurfaced only to be saved and kept afloat by a sea lion until the Coast Guard boat arrived behind me. It was in the hospital, in the first psych ward I was in, where a Franciscan friar named Brother George Cherry, who's in my film Suicide, The Ripple Effect, came into my room. Now, this gentleman had always looked at the chart of going into a room. He always looked at the chart to see what the person had gone through and why they were in the hospital. And he's a chaplain for the better part of 30 years at this hospital. He walks into my room, not having looked at the chart for the first time in about 30 years. And he says, "Hey, kid, what are you in for?" And I said, "Brother, I jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge." And he said, "Yeah, and I'm the Pope." He didn't believe me. And I said, "No, brother, that's what happened. That's why I'm putting on this back brace. That's why I walk with this cane." And he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And he came over to my left side and he said, "Let's pray." And he had a rosary, a red rosary, I'll never forget, in his right hand. And he put his left hand on my forehead. And we said a few prayers I was very familiar with as a Catholic. And he said, "Kid," after the prayer, he said, "Kid, when you get better, you ought to talk about this." And I said, "About what? To who?" I had no idea what he meant. And he said, "You'll see." Every day, Brother George Cherry would come into my room. Every day he would pray with me. And every day he would say, "Kid, when you get better, you ought to talk about this." And every day I would ignore him. On the final day of my stay, he said, "Kid, I expect you're going to talk about this." And I remember thinking to myself, this guy is out of his mind. And I get out of the hospital and I go home with my father. And very soon thereafter, on a Sunday, my father takes me to church, the church I grew up in, St. Cecilia's in San Francisco. And the then Monsignor Michael Harriman gave a service that I thought was talking directly to me, as I had just survived this terrible feat, and it was just very timely. And he comes out after the service, and he stops me and my dad, and he says, "Kevin, how would you like to come and talk to our 7th and 8th grade class about your experience this Good Friday?" Now, it had only been 7 months since my attempt. And I said, "Father, I don't have a speech and I wouldn't know what to say." And that's when my dad shoved me forward with his oven mitt-sized hand and said, "He'll do it." I turned around and said, "Dad, what are you doing?" He goes, "You'll do it with closure." I'm like, "You need closure. I need to go home and lay down, you know." But right then and there, my dad committed me to the speech. And I said, "I'll be there on Good Friday, you know, come hell or high water." What ended up happening next was I wrote the speech till 3 a.m. before Good Friday, which is not mentally healthy at all. And my dad edited it that morning at 7 a.m. and the speech was at 8 or 9. And we go to the rectory of St. Cecilia's grade school, and in front of me are sitting 120 7th and 8th grade kids in the Catholic uniforms I used to wear. And I'm thinking to myself, who is this going to help, and why am I doing this? This isn't going to help anybody. And I'm wearing my back brace. I'm holding onto my cane for dear life, wobbling, and I'm dropping page by page to the floor of this 17-page document, the speech I wrote. And I'm reading it from the page, and I'm shaking and I'm crying the whole time. It's very raw. I finished the 17th page. It drops to the floor, and 8 hands immediately go up. And I was like, "Oh, wow, that must have had some kind of an impact." The first question was inappropriate. The next 7 questions were phenomenal. They were inquisitive, intelligible, important questions. And I realized then in that moment, I had actually made an impact. 2 weeks later, Monsignor Harriman called me to the rectory and says, "Come over, I've got something to share with you." And I hiked up a 2-mile hill with my back brace and my cane to the rectory. And Monsignor Harriman handed me a manila envelope and said, "Open it." I opened it, And in there was a folded folder of a hand-drawn and hand pencil-colored Jesus of the Sacred Heart. Inside there was 120 letters from 120 kids. And in those 120 letters, several of those kids wrote about their active suicidal crisis. We were able to get them help because the letters were screened. We were able to get them to safety, and those kids are alive today. And that is, in a nutshell, what led me to make suicide prevention the distinct purpose of my life.
Kevin, thank you so much for sharing that. That is just an amazing testimony that you've just given, and as well as being very entertaining to hear, it's extremely profound and important message for so many people to know that you are there as a resource and activist for suicide prevention. Dear viewers, if you are experiencing suicidal thoughts, feel free to call this National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 1-800-273-8255, or contact the crisis text line by texting HOME to 741-741. And you're welcome to post questions at any time or comments at any time for our guest today. Looks like we have a test. We did have a question earlier from Joshua Lopez. Josh, we'll get to that a little bit later and answer that for you. But Linda Meyer, you have an amazing testimony, Kevin. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Linda.
Absolutely. Thank you, Linda, for your comment. And Candace Thursby says, amazing act of bravery, Kevin. Thank you, Candace. Thank you, Candace. Kevin, thanks again. So what advice, before the current pandemic, for the last several years, we've had an increasing suicide epidemic in the United States. Why do you think that is?
You know, Brandon, I don't think there's one thing that you can pinpoint, but I do think that it's a period of increased stress, a lack of sense of security that may be seriously contributing to this. We know this. We know since 1999 that the suicide rate has climbed 35%, and systems of science and care have remained static. They're not adjusting to the times. They're not adjusting to the current needs. We know that suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States and the second leading cause of death in the world for those ages 15 to 24. Thousands of people die by suicide a year, but millions we know think about it. In fact, the lack of funding is to blame. If you look at it like this, money to research and combat suicide continues to lie behind leading killers. The National Institute of Health, the largest public funder for biomedical research in the world, spent only $103 million on suicide and suicide prevention in 2017. But it spent $689 million that same year studying breast cancer, which killed only a few thousand more people. In 2018, spending on suicide increased to $147 million for suicide. We have not tried spending to the scale of the problem. What we have tried spending to the scale of the problem for many other diseases, and it's worked in lowering those deaths. There's no reason why we shouldn't try it as it regards to the prevention of suicide. You know, it's impossible to solve a problem when it's so well misunderstood. U.S. suicide rates are at their highest since World War II. We've got the opioid crisis, widespread social media use, and high rates of stress that may be among the myriad of contributing factors. However, I'm really convinced that we're not looking at this problem the right way. Let's just take one example, social media, for instance. You read in the news that a young person has died and social media is to blame. It happens all the time by suicide. It's the simple narrative. It's an attractive narrative. It's a story with a distinct reason and a solution. But this is, at its best, sensationalized media. Yet we know life is rarely that easy to define. We know that approximately 90% of people who die by suicide have a diagnosed or undiagnosed mental health problem at the time of their death. So if someone is researching suicide methods on social media, the evidence points to the fact that they have already been vulnerable beforehand, not that is the causative factor. Thus, a person in crisis that is looking at social media itself is not the cause of the crisis. Others argue regularly that social media offers a portal to connection for so many to prevent suicide, some social connection. We're seeing significant evidence of this positive social media connection with our current COVID-19 situation. I mean, look what we're doing right here, Brandon. We're having this conversation here on Facebook Live for the world to see, and we're doing it because social media is such a positive factor. There are so many factors attributing to the rise of suicides. However, I think we have not had enough resources to scale the necessary prevention efforts to curb that rise. and reduce suicides effectively and measurably. So we can't just blame one thing. We have to take an all-encompassing approach and make sure we understand the entirety of the problem.
Wow, Kevin, thank you for that great manifesto, in a sense, about how important it is to fund suicide prevention research and programs to help people who are feeling suicidal. That's a really important message. Thank you. We have a few comments from the audience. Lara Ayers has said, Kevin, we met when you spoke at UNR a few years ago. Your vulnerability and your relationship with your awesome wife inspire me daily. What are some tips you have for fighting depression while social distancing?
Do you want me to answer that right away, or should we answer that later?
You're welcome to answer it now. Yeah, go ahead.
You know, well, first of all, it's great to meet you, by the way. But I think that in this time of COVID-19 and the coronavirus, while we have to physically distance from most people, you want to socially connect online to as many people as you can that love you and care for you. You want to have conversations about your fears and your worries and your anxiety. You want to open your heart and open your mind and be vulnerable yourself so that you can have your pain shared, because the pain shared is a pain halved. I think that remember that your words are valued. They are important just as you are. And that no matter the fear and anxiety and the uncertainty that comes with COVID-19 and all that it encompasses, you can get through this one day at a time, one moment at a time. Baby steps is the key.
Thank you, Kevin. That's awesome. And Lara, thank you for your great question.
Thank you.
We've had a flood of questions coming in. We'll answer those at the end of the interview. It won't be too long now. Thanks everyone for your questions. We'll get to those very soon. Kevin, you're a popular guy. So next question is for Erin. When a major life event occurs, when is someone most at risk for developing signs of depression, and can targeted and timely interventions help to prevent the risk of depression and possibly even suicidal thoughts?
So that's a great question, and something that scientists have actually been working for quite a while, trying to answer the question, because we really actually don't know a lot about exactly how depression comes about. I think the other challenge is that we also often talk about depression like it's one thing. And what we really know from the latest research is that people who experience depression can have it in so many different forms. So, for example, you see it now with how people are coping with the stress of COVID-19. Some people are oversleeping and undersleeping. Other people are overeating and undereating. Depression works in just the same way, where people can have these range of different symptoms. And we don't really know why some people have certain symptoms compared to others. I think we also need to have a better understanding of exactly how depression comes about in the form of just what it looks like in terms of its natural course. So, for example, there are some people who will experience symptoms pretty quickly, but there's also people who it might take a bit of time. So part of what's really so challenging about studying depression is that it's often not just one single thing that causes it. It's a recipe. It's a combination of a lot of different things, both genetic and biological and other social factors. And it might be that someone might not experience depression until 6 months from now or several years from now. And it could be that doesn't happen until there's an additional trauma that gets added in at some point. So I think the key really is that if anyone is starting to feel that they are maybe tipping that balance of starting to have those feelings that feel less normal in terms of what everything that's happening now, I think people have to really reach out for help. And I think one of the things that I've been encouraged by is seeing the data showing how many people are reaching out for help, who are calling these hotlines. So I think the data that I saw yesterday was that there was an 800% increase in the number of people who were calling national helplines. So that's a lot of extra people, that are calling compared to day to day. But I think, to me, I hear that as a sign of hope, that people are reaching out maybe sooner than they would be otherwise to try to get that help that they need.
Erin, thank you. That's amazing. And so what advice do you have for parents who have small children to help their children to cope in these troubled times, and even for parents, especially with older children and adolescents who might be under a lot of stress these days?
Yeah, those are good questions. So I think there's a couple of things that parents can do. I think what I'm hearing and seeing in terms of the research evidence, and I really want to make sure that I emphasize that I'm not a clinician. I'm also not a parent. So where I'm really coming from is more around what I'm seeing in terms of the research literature. And here again, I think what we're seeing is movement, exercise is something that I think can be really beneficial for kids and really for everyone, no matter their age. I think specifically for kids, we want to work to try to listen, to really hear their concerns, to give age appropriate feedback and guidance to help them, navigate these challenging times ahead. But I think there's also, ways that we could think about this as teachable moments where, we can try to help our young people and teens in particular think about the kinds of things that we want them to learn as a result of this. So part of what I think is that could be a teachable moment is this idea that we're all in this together, that there's so many people who are fighting in so many different ways to try to bend the curve. People who are staying home are playing a critical role right now in helping to do that. Everyone who's on the front lines working to, fight the coronavirus, whether that's a nurse or a doctor or some other type of physician, the folks who work in grocery stores who are making sure that people have food, and so on and so forth. So I think there's a time to also talk with children and adolescents and teens in particular about that. And I think the other piece too that also might be helpful is that, I think one of the other kind of quiet battles we've been fighting throughout this pandemic is something that we've been seeing going on for a while now around science and how people trust or distrust in science. So I hope that one of the things that's going to come out from this is that people will also be able to trust more in scientists, to trust more in doctors and in medicine, and that can be something that we also start to talk about with children and young people. And then I think the final point I'll make, which builds on what Kevin said, is around social media and media consumption. And I think this probably cuts both ways. And I think it's important to differentiate between media, news and newspapers, broadcast news, from also social media. And I think encouraging our young people to be mindful and to try to strike a balance where they're consuming media and maybe consuming social media in a way that feels helpful, where they can balance being informed and feeling connected, but also not so on it as much where they're maybe getting inundated with information in a way that might not feel helpful. So I think the point about media consumption and social media consumption should be one that people hear, not just for teens, but also really for anyone at any age.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Erin, thank you. That's great advice, and I try to follow that as well. And not watch news occasionally, but not make it like a thing that I obsess over. And that helps me to feel more stable. I listen to music as well when I'm in the car, and instead of only listening to the news, it's very helpful. Thank you. And the idea of building a sense of community and what we're doing, that's a great comment as well. Great news, everyone. Ann McCue has been able to join us. She is actually in the waiting right now, ready to perform when we're done with our interview today. So please sit tight, and Ann will be ready to perform very soon. And by the way, it looks like we can see kind of not your head at this point in the offline camera, but if it's possible to adjust your camera up a little bit, then we'll be able to see better when it's time to go. Thank you, Ann, for joining. So, we'll be glad to get to her in just a few minutes here. So Erin, thank you for that great Great question, great comment there. So next question is for Kevin. Kevin, what motivates people to continue to thrive, even in the face of a crisis, and to embrace life in these troubled times?
You know, Brandon, I can speak from personal experience that I think it's different for everybody. Every human being is different. Every human brain is different. For me, I found a way to love myself again, where I had such self-hatred for such a long time. I completely value all life. I empathize with everyone, no matter their behavior toward me. I value hope above all else. I value joy, and I'm truly grateful for my second chance and mindful of life's fragility every single day. So I think when people are going through crisis like this COVID-19, or like a mental health crisis, or a life situation crisis, what can get you through the day is tactical efforts to increase your resiliency one day at a time, by recognizing that if you just get to tomorrow, that you can do that one day at a time, continuously, effortfully, and regularly. And I think that we can all find the motivation to embrace life, its existence, the fact that we're lucky to be here, the fact that we get to exist is a miracle. Look at all the children who never made it past the womb. My wife and I know that pain all too well. Our boy, Jack Ryan, lived 8 weeks and no more. It breaks my heart every single day. But you all watching are intended to be here until your natural end. As sure as I'm looking into this camera lens to look into your eyes, I know you're supposed to be here because you got the privilege to exist in the first place, where my Jack Ryan did not. So remember that, understand that your times of crisis, that's a time where you can build resilience if you believe in yourself and you have self-love.
Kevin, thank you. That's so awesome. I really appreciate what you said. I'm sure everyone out there does too. I empathize, in that I too am grateful to be here after having had suicidal thoughts in the past. So thanks for what you said. Is there a recipe for how to thrive?
You know, I think there is. I put in the work every single day. I have a 10-step routine that I follow with precise discipline. It has brought me wellness to the best of my ability for 20 years. That doesn't mean I haven't had all the symptoms I ever had of bipolar disorder: mania, depression, paranoia, hallucinations, anxiety attacks, panic attacks. I have all of it, but I'm able to manage them to the core because of these 10 steps, including a regimen of activities like great sleep, proper nutrition, exercise, and a variety of therapies that work well for me, that I had to hand pick and build my toolbox from scratch. You can find my Art of Wellness routine at youtube.com/Kevin Hines under the playlist, The Art of Wellness. 10 steps, 12 videos, 3 to 5 minutes each, easily digestible ways to change your brain, mind, behavioral, and mental health and well-being right now. People are saying, who are following this program, that in 6 to 9 months, they see a dramatic change in their mental health for the better. And I want everyone watching right now to recognize that these tools are common sense tools for better brain health. They are for everyone, every human being. They can be utilized by you. And if mastered one step at a time, they can change your life because you're changing your life. I think that that's the best advice I can give, is to use something that's tried, true, and effective. This is science-based, evidence-informed information to better your brain health, and I want it to help you so bad. And please go to that YouTube channel. Please go to the playlist, The Art of Wellness. Download that and begin your effort today, because the only way, Brandon, to get to a place of thriving after a suicide attempt, or after suicidal ideations, or after something like COVID-19's uncertainty, is to put in the hard work. That is the only way to change your outcome. Hard work, because nothing good ever came without it.
I love that, Kevin. You get out of life what you put into it. I firmly believe that. Thanks for saying that. That's fantastic. So Erin and Kevin, what are your key takeaway points for people out there who might be struggling? And what would you like them to know about depression, resiliency in this time of crisis? First, Erin, and then Kevin, please.
Yeah, I think everything that we've been talking about so far in terms of, and I love how you put it, Kevin, this toolkit. I think everyone should be doubling down on whatever's in their toolkit, adding in new tools to the toolkit, working on doing even more of the things that were already there to try to promote your brain health and prevent any, long-term brain health related challenges that might come from this. And I think everything that Kevin shared is great in terms of the science-backed information. So moving, physical activity and exercise, meditation, focus on things that you can control, and really trying to, within the course of your day, partition your thinking and your activities around things that you can actually control and things that you can't. And I think, having and developing that practice of gratitude and mindfulness as you carry out all of your activities in your day-to-day, I think is going to be really critical. And I think the main message that I want to share with people is really to convey a point of hope that even though we are experiencing this massive and profound pandemic, I think there's a lot that we can and should be hopeful for in terms of how we're all going to get through it and the positive changes that we're going to see in the long term after we get out of this, critical period, that are many reasons why we should be hopeful for the future.
Thank you, Erin. Kevin?
I want people right now who are watching, who are considering suicide, have considered suicide, or have attempted, to remember this. Your suicidal thoughts do not have to become your actions. If you can recognize in the face of a suicidal crisis that your thoughts don't have to own, rule, or define your next action, you can always remain here. You can be here tomorrow and every day after that. For those who have mental health conditions, you should be contacting your mental health provider if you have one, members of your care team if you're lucky enough to have one, family therapists, doctors. Make a written plan for how you will get care during this pandemic crisis. If you have been out of touch with your care team, consider reaching back out now instead of waiting for the crisis to reestablish yourself in the case of stress or illness which could cause a relapse. Right now is the key time to restrict your access to highly lethal means such as guns, numerous medications, or other methods you have considered for self-harm. Establish a physical distancing wellness plan for yourself that's right for your personal health and well-being. Think about how you will maintain healthy sleep, eating, and activities under these unusual, very uncertain circumstances. Make sure that your medications are filled and that you have all the things you need to stay safe at home, including food. You may need to do problem solving around issues such as housing stability, finances, and if this pandemic has impacted your ability to work, it definitely is going to affect how you pay your bills. This is a very important thing in preventing suicidal crisis when you're going through something like this, which so many people now are with COVID-19. Be aware that you may be impacted by these stressful issues of this pandemic for some time to come, and be prepared to notice changes in your health or even suicide risk assessing in the upcoming months or year, as some changes to your health will appear for a long time or be delayed. We have to recognize, like Dr. Dunn said, that we are in this together. And I know we don't all get to physically be together to support each other physically, to be there to pat each other's backs, wish each other well, and physically exchange words. But to utilize tools like Facebook Live, like social media, like regular media, to connect in ways that you couldn't otherwise do in person right now is crucial. So connect with everyone you possibly can to get yourself through this trying time. Don't be afraid to pick up that phone and call that person you haven't talked to in weeks, months, or years and say, I just need your ear right now. I need you to lend me your ear so I can get something off my chest so I can get to a better place. If that's all you need, then we can oblige.
Awesome, Kevin. Thank you so much. Thank you. We have a lot of comments and questions from the audience, and now it's time to take them. And we'll get to Ann McCue, the singer-songwriter, is going to perform a song for us in just a little bit here. And thanks for being patient with us. And we'll go ahead and take some questions and comments from the audience. So Linda Meyer, again, thank you for your comment here. I'm a social worker, and some of my clients are struggling. You can also see that I'm starting to become more depressed. So again, thank you. That was from the beginning of the episode. Joshua Lifez has a, and yeah, thank you, Linda, for your comment again. Joshua Lifez has a question. How can we learn more about the work in post-traumatic growth? I'm familiar with resilience, but I've not come across this formal concept before. Erin, I think that's a question for you.
Yeah, so it's something that that researchers have been studying for a while. I can definitely, following this, send out a couple of links that are helpful. Part of what researchers are spending a lot of time now is trying to really unpack what we mean by resilience. So, and how it's different from other things like something like post-traumatic growth. But basically, you know, when scientists talk about post-traumatic growth, they're talking about the positive psychological and other things that could happen as a result of people experiencing stress and trauma. So, for example, developing new interests, feeling like you're establishing a new path in life, feeling like you can handle things a little bit better, that you're maybe more accepting of challenges and other people, and feel like you're taking advantage of opportunities that might not have otherwise been possible. So those are some things that I think might be helpful guideposts that allow people to think about how to get through these challenging days and weeks and months ahead.
Awesome. Thank you, Erin. So next question, we have one from, let's see, I have a comment from Rabina Richitello. Thanks for sharing your story, Kevin. I'll display it now. It's critical to recognize how important personal storytelling is to connect with other people, especially young people who may be having suicidal thoughts. Your honesty is changing lives. Thank you, Rabina.
Thank you.
Gail Ayers. Gail, thanks again for being on Brainwaves with us again. Gail Ayers says, I love, kid, you're going to talk about this. A rheumatologist said something similar to me in regard to caregiving when I began providing care for my younger daughter who lives with a severe brain illness. It's such a powerful statement. I'll read the rest. Such a powerful statement. It provides hope and possibility. Thank you for sharing this. My older daughter was very fortunate to meet you at University of Nevada, Reno. That was Lara who just asked a question a little earlier. Your advocacy impacted her profoundly. Thank you.
Thank you, Lara. Thank you, Gail. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gail. So let's see. Gail Ayers has another question. This is for Erin. Erin, how can a caregiver of a loved one with a severe brain illness help map, encourage good choices while honoring their independence, their way through trauma?
I missed that last part of your question. I'm sorry. Do you mind repeating it, Brandon?
Sure, no problem. Erin, how can a caregiver of a loved one living with a severe brain illness help to encourage good choices while honoring their independence to help their way through trauma?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it goes back to what we've been talking about in terms of those tools in the toolbox. And it might be that it's helpful to remind people, you know, appropriately when they're doing a good job using some of those tools, but then also maybe giving some helpful suggestions around new tools that can be added to that toolbox. And I think, you know, every person is different. Every person has different needs and goals, and also willingness to hear, you know, feedback from other people. So I think trying to maybe strike that balance and figure out how best to support and how to pump that brake and do the gas brake kind of thing to help support people in need. And I think, you know, I think the other piece is that first and foremost, we have our basic needs that we really need to make sure we're shoring up. So do we have enough food? You know, do we have enough money to be able to, you know, acquire the food, and really just think about more of the basic needs and then adding on to that. So I think in that way, there can also be strategies to deploy to try to make sure that people are connecting with only their most critical resources first, and then building on from thereafter by making sure that people can be using every tool that's possibly available to them in their brain health promotion toolbox.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Thank you, Erin. Another question here from my friend George Fajusco. George, thank you so much for watching. George asks, the COVID-19 crisis has disrupted my sleep pattern to the point where I'm awake for a few hours in the middle of the night, thinking and worrying about the situation. I'm wondering if melatonin would help, or is it better to spend more time outdoors? Thank you all for the important work you do and for sharing your time. Thanks, George. Any thoughts, Erin or Kevin? Erin first.
Yeah, I would say that, there's certainly, both anecdotal and scientific evidence around melatonin being helpful for folks. I think, certainly we're also not getting outside enough in ways that our natural circadian rhythms and cycles might be disrupted. So I think certainly, and let me also be clear that I'm not a clinician, I'm a scientist. But it could be something that, melatonin might be something that you do want to try to take. I think the other piece too is maybe just thinking about those habits you're having or starting to create around sleep and how you're getting to sleep. So for example, I noticed that for myself, it was really tough to watch news before I went to bed. That was my normal habit, but I found that, like you, I was waking up in the middle of the night and starting to feel like I was having a harder time going back to sleep. So that's where I started to not only try to get out more during the day to take walks where I felt like I could be at a 6-foot distance from other people, but that I also just started to meditate before I went to bed to try to calm those thoughts and to not have them be so intrusive. So I hope those are some ideas that might be able to help you through this.
Okay, great. Thank you, Erin, for that. So we'll have Ann on in just a moment as soon as Kevin answers this question. And if you could please come back and be ready to perform in just a minute, that'd be awesome. We're getting toward the top of the hour. So Kevin, do you have any thoughts about this question George asked?
Yeah, I think that those breathing exercises I mentioned earlier are crucial. If I didn't mention them, I'll mention them now. Taking the time before you rest your body to rest your mind, which means inhale 4 seconds through your nose, exhale 8 seconds, purse lips like a whistle but no sound, and do that 30 times prior to even laying down in the sheets in bed. So you can rest your mind, come to a calm, using things like the Calm app or Headspace to bring your body and mind to a proper calm before you lay down. Taking all devices like your mobile phones or your laptops or your iPads and having at least half an hour from the time you looked at them to the time you're laying your head down, so that you're not having that blue wave light that those devices emit, keeping you awake at night, and keeping your mind going, and because you're constantly seeing what was played off on those screens. Having that out of your mind, out of your shell space, half an hour to an hour before you actually go to bed, and then doing those 30 deep breaths where you're bringing your body back to a calm before you lay down might really help you. But think of something also, melatonin. I actually take melatonin, so thank you for bringing that up. But also think of something like chamomile tea, half an hour to an hour before you go to bed as well. Make sure you're not drinking coffee or any caffeine past 2:30 in the afternoon, because we know that it has a 7.5-hour half-life and that it can keep you awake upwards of 2 days when you're trying to get to sleep. So all of these things, including Dr. Dunn's suggestions, could make a big impact on you getting better sleep, George. So I sincerely hope they help you out.
George, again, thanks for your question. Kevin and Erin, thanks for your great answers to George's question. It's been fantastic to hear. So now, and I want to thank you both for being on Brainwaves with me today. We had a number of other great questions and comments posted, which you can see after this webcast recording is posted, and that will be at onemind.org/brainwaves. You can post follow-up questions there over the next 3 days until Friday for Erin or Kevin. And they can respond occasionally throughout each day. It'll be asynchronous, so like a blog post type thing. So now it's time for Ann McCue. And thank you so much, Erin and Kevin, for being on Brainwaves. I'll talk to you again soon. You're welcome to watch the rest.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We're joined now by singer-songwriter Ann McCue. Ann is an amazing singer-songwriter from Nashville, and she is the writer and performer of a song called Stupid, which she wrote in the year 2004 for her album called Roll, which is about her own struggles with suicidal thoughts, and it's an amazing song. And thanks so much for joining us today on Brainwaves.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're really excited to hear your song, and I'm sure the audience is too. So what was going on in your life at the time that you wrote this song called Stupid, and what inspired you to write the song?
Well, I wrote it about maybe 6 years after the events that took place, but all my life, like probably since a teenager, was my first bout of full-on depression, and I had managed to get through that. And then in my 20s, it would come back and go away. It's like a bad season or a dark friend that comes, and hangs around, and you just have to wait it out, really. But so I guess it got really bad just after my mother died when I was 33, and I just went into a really deep depression, and and I'd had suicidal thoughts at the other times I'd been depressed as well, and so years later, I managed to get through it. I escaped with my life basically, and years later, I wrote this song, thinking back about what if I had, actually done it, and because after that period, I left Australia and I started traveling the world and playing music all over the world, and all the things that I've done since then that I wouldn't have ever been able to have done. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And sometimes you listen too much to outside voices and people and voices of doom and all that sort of thing. And also, I chose so much. After that point, I got really much healthier, and I stopped drinking. And I think alcohol is a real depressant if you're already like that. It might give you a buzz in the first couple of drinks, but it's actually depressing you the next day and all that. So I just started making really healthy choices. I went and did a Vipassana 10-day retreat, and that was like walking through a corridor and starting my life again. I've done a lot of that where you start your life again, whether
Wow.
it's to take a nap and start my life fresh when I wake up. That's where I'm at right now during this crisis that we're in. I'm like, okay, I think I'll just try and take a nap and start life again after that.
That's fantastic. It's great you can do those resets like that. That's great to be able to kind of clear your head, clear your mind, clear your heart, and then be able to start again fresh. I find that when I play music, I play guitar too, and when I play music, that kind of really resets my mood and gets me invigorated and ready to take on the world again. That's something that helps me. And does creativity help you as well?
Oh yeah, I mean, playing the guitar, which I took up when I was a teenager, and I was quite depressed as a teenager, unfortunately. But guitar was the thing. It's always been the thing that it's a form of meditation for me, I think. And when I play the guitar, it brings me back to the moment, and it's a very zen thing to do, play a musical instrument. So I recommend it to anyone. It doesn't matter how old you are, enjoy the process of learning an instrument and playing, because as soon as you start playing, you're right there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Going, wah, wah, wah.
Yeah.
Think crazy. You're just going down, 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 down. You're in that moment.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And we're here in the moment right now. Let's hear your beautiful song, Stupid. Please play it for us. I'd love to hear it.
Thanks for having me, Brandon.
Yeah, absolutely. You're welcome.
When it's said there are no institutions, there's nothing to believe in anymore. The time of the flood is almost here. The end of the world is drawing near. Stupid, out of
lonely afternoon. I almost gave up on my life too soon. Reckless at the lonely close of day. I almost listened to what the prophets had to say. I'm gonna write a Bob Dylan song. I'll sing all day, but it won't take long. Well, I never worked in a factory, but I suffered your shame, shoveled your debris. Stupid on a lonely afternoon. I almost gave up on my life too soon. Reckless at the lonely close of day. I almost listened to what the prophets had to say. And I see the light come shining down on me. And it's full of solar energy. There is no greater power. No man-made God could ever be. No man-made God could ever be. Stupid on a lonely afternoon. I almost gave up on my life too soon. Reckless at the lonely close of day. I almost listened to what the prophets had to say. Stupid on a lonely afternoon. I almost gave in to the voice of doom. Reckless at the lonely close of day. I almost listened to what the prophets had to say.
Annie, that was so beautiful. Thank you for that performance. It moved me, transported me. I felt so moved by that song. And thank you for lifting my spirits so well, and I'm sure you lifted a lot of people's spirits with that performance. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks for having the show.
For sure. I just have one more question to ask, if you don't mind. How does it feel to share that story with people?
Well, it's a little scary to talk about it.
Yeah.
It's not something we talk about, is it? And I think we probably should talk about it a lot more. I don't think, especially right now, depression is something that everyone's going through. So you don't feel like you're the only one, but in normal circumstances, you do feel like you're the only one, and it's a very isolating experience. And you're not the only one, but you think you are, and that makes it even worse.
Totally get it. So we're together in this not being alone here. So
Yes.
yeah, we're all in this together.
Hmm.
Well, thank you, Annie. Really appreciate it. Hope to talk to you again in the near future. Maybe have you back on Brainwave sometime.
That'd be great. Thanks so much. Good luck, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. Stay safe, everyone. Take care, Annie. Bye-bye.
Bye.